Everyone, good to see you here. It is Tuesday, March 25th, 2025, and we're at the Athens-Clarke County City Hall just after 3 o'clock. And we have a couple of meetings today. We have a special called session that I'll get into in just a moment. And then following that, we will have our normally scheduled Big Rocks pre-budget work session. So I'm going to begin asking the clerk to call roll for us.
Davenport.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Taylor.
Here.
Wright.
Present.
Fisher.
Here.
Johnson. Culpepper. Myers.
Here.
Thornton.
I'm here, trying to turn my phone off.
Hamby. We have a quorum.
Oh, thank you, Madam Clerk. I appreciate that. First thing I need from the body is a motion to amend the agenda to add two items. First, an executive session to discuss pending or threatened litigation. And secondly, an item to appoint Jim Davis to serve as interim municipal court judge and administrative hearing officer. Do I hear a motion to add those two items?
So moved.
Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Wright, and I have a second from Commissioner Fisher to add those two items on the agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? All right, hearing none, motion carries. All right, given that everything on the special called session agenda is new business, I do need a motion for suspension of rules.
So moved. Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Myers. I've got a second from Commissioner Taylor. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, could I have a motion to enter executive session again for the purpose of threatened or pending litigation?
So move.
Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Fisher and a second from Commissioner Taylor. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, go ahead and kill power, and then we will be in executive session.
Wouldn't use.
I get a motion to exit executive session.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Taylor and a second from Commissioner Davenport to exit executive session. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, hearing none, motion carries. All right, we need to go ahead and move on with the remainder of our special called session business. First item is to vote for the resolution to accept Judge Marcy Jollis's resignation. You have the resolution in front of you. Do I hear a motion for this resolution?
So moved. Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Wright, second from Commissioner Taylor. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and then that final item of new business that we mentioned as we amended the agenda at the beginning of the afternoon is I need a motion to appoint, make sure I read the language accurately here. So I hereby nominate Jim Davis to serve as interim municipal court judge and interim hearing officer of Athens-Clarke County, Georgia. Mr. Davis will serve in these interim roles effective March 29th, 2025, and serve through and including June 30th, 2025. I request that you approve the nomination of Jim Davis to serve as interim municipal court judge and interim administrative hearing officer of Athens-Clarke County, Georgia, and authorize me to execute any necessary employment agreements. Is there a motion to that effect?
So move, Mayor. Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Fisher. I've got a second from Commissioner Davenport. All in
I have a
favor, please. Question?
How was he decided upon?
Yeah, so
What criteria, like what process?
Yeah, so Jim Davis was formerly an employee of the county attorney's office and had served as the prosecutor in municipal court, so is familiar with protocols in municipal court. And prior time, 2 years ago, when we had about a similar length interim in between municipal court judges who were permanently installed, Mr. Davis also served as that interim.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, hearing none, motion carries. All right, entertain a motion to adjourn from our special called session.
So moved. Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Link. I have a second from Commissioner Taylor. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, hearing none, motion carries. All right, I am going to push my chair back and go sit next to Brad, because I think we've got a couple things that we'll bring up on the screen.
Thank you, though. Yes, please. Send me a text so I can talk.
See, I'm doing well. Being here. Thank you, staff. Appreciate it. For those of you either watching or in the chamber, relatively new to this, we really kick off our formal public budget process with just a short presentation from management and staff to identify, as the language of the program indicates, the big rocks or sort of major components that we are familiar with in the budget, the things that we know, whether these are revenues or anticipated expenditures that we just have to be conscious of. So this isn't the time when we get into line item details or individual staff positions, but just from a very high level, questions about, again, what the anticipated property tax is, what we would expect, questions around benefits to be like. And we'll go into more detail about compensation and benefits at a subsequent work session. So we won't even go kind of deep there, but this is just a sort of top-level number opportunity. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the manager to talk about what we're going to hear.
Thank you, Mayor, and happy to be here. This is the first one for me, too. I don't think in the 30 years that I served in the planning department, I ever actually sat in on one of these. So It is new for me. It may be a little different type of presentation than you guys have received in the past, and if it falls short, I apologize a little bit, but I really, as the mayor indicated, I want to try to hit it at a high level today, kind of outline the process that we have gone through as a team, where we are, and what some of the major challenges were, a little bit about our revenue estimates, expenditure estimates, things like that, just to kind of set the table as then we hand off our work to the mayor tomorrow, and then he will work on a budget to bring forward to you, and then you all will work on it at a higher level of detail. So before I get started, I've always heard that this is the manager's budget that he's handing off to the mayor. And while I guess technically in title it is the manager's budget, it's really, I was interested to see what a team effort this is from a standpoint, just a huge thanks to our budget department, our finance department, Andrew and Sarah in the manager's office. From start to finish, that was one of my big fears coming into this, was they're just going to hand me this budget and I got to figure it out. And it was very much a team effort, a team activity. Now, at the end of the day, the decisions on recommendations to the mayor for what to fund and what not to fund were ultimately mine to make, but it was all done so with a great wealth of knowledge sitting back there behind me. So thanks to all of you. So that's kind of where we are at this point. Kind of gone through the purpose there. As you all know, when this starts, all of the departments prepare budgets. Most of those budgets have requests for over limit amounts or things that they are asking for in addition to what there was in their budget last year for consideration to be funded. New initiatives, if they're asking for new positions, we meet with all of those groups. The mayor and Mayor Pro Tem meet along with myself with our constitution and elected groups, and they ask the questions. I really just kind of sit quietly and listen in those meetings that Mayor Gertz and Mayor Pro Tem Fisher attended. And then we compile all of that information, budget puts it together, and then we sit down and we start going line by line after we know how much we have projected to work with in the form of revenue, and then you start pulling out big rocks, which is where this got its name many, many years ago, and the end goal is to try to come to something that is fairly neutral in terms of revenues and expenditures. So from the beginning, first slide here is we're showing the estimated, because we have not finalized the FY25 revenues and transfers in yet, but we're at about $9 million proposed for 26, projected above last year, which is running at about a 4.5% to 5% increase in terms of revenues, and that is all things from property taxes to from SPLOST and T-SPLOST, from fees, other revenues, transfers in, that's your money that comes in to fund the pension program. So we're 9 million up from where we were last year. As a percentage though, that's just running at about 4.5%. And that was that way from property taxes when we're dealing with the new House bill all the way down through most of those coming in were at that number. So I think lower than what we have been used to seeing in the past. Then we have the second line on the right side, which is manager proposed. These were the expenditures and transfers out, which is running at about 3 million and change more than we're proposing for revenues in. And I'll jump back on this one in just a minute. Here was the other big thing other than big rocks. When you looked at the additional operating funds requested by all of our departments and the new initiatives, I mean, we had almost $40 million of requests from our departments above their base budget that they were given to work with from last year. And honestly, the vast majority of these things that the departments are asking for are their needs. They're needs based on new initiatives. They are needs based on inflation and increases and with the positions too. And then what we've tried to show you here is we went line by line through every department, every ask, because we knew what we had to work with. Our recommendation, and my ultimate recommendation to the manager, is to only recommend funding about 9.5% of that $34 million of additional operating. That's anything from utility increases to overtime, to, a lot of those line item budget things that they either were running short on. So we're less than 10% of what was asked for by the departments in this government. We're recommending to be funded in terms of additional operating. And then with new initiatives, there were about 4.5 million. We recommended about 10% there too. And then 300,000 in T-SPLOS operating impact offsets, and did not recommend any of that. And where I think this one's important is, even with that, and then $26 million of capital requests in 110 different projects that were asked for, what I'm recommending is that we fund, and these aren't total funds based on request, of the 110, there's funding being recommended to 10 of those 110 projects. That's a little small amount, and a whole lot of the others that are being recommended currently to not be funded are the annual year-to-year requests that departments make, as they continue to try to build, inventory. One of them is an example just to use because it just sticks in my mind, that the fire department regularly knows they're going to have to buy hoses and nozzles, and those things are expensive. And so they ask for a set amount of money each year as a capital item. I think one could question, if there was a way to move that into an operating cost instead of an annual capital, that may be a good thing, but there's a lot of money in there to do that. The vast majority, if not all, of those annual line by lines this year were not recommended for funding, just quite simply because the funding wasn't there to pay for it. The big hitters there were, your facilities, infrastructure, life cycle costs that are a big capital item, and we were only able to fund a relatively small percentage there. The life cycle and maintenance of our parks, our pavement program, our traffic signals, those types of big picture items were the ones generally that we were able to look for. Let's see if I missed any here. But the point I'm trying to make with that is that even with that little small percentage of what the asks were from our departments, we're $3 million in the hole right now there by just doing that. That was we started with a base on our capital funding of $5 million, which is a small amount. We had individual capital project submittals that were far exceeded that total amount. There were legitimate asks from departments for long-term maintenance and life cycle work. We ended up adding $2 million of a total of $3 million that we're requesting to be pulled from fund balance, which got us up to $7 million, which funded simply a portion of those 10 projects. And so that's where we are. But if we get into the big rocks, this is, we start off, yes,
Could you go back to that slide?
sure.
I just want to make sure, I'm looking at it, so you didn't have to go back, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
So you're saying 10 of 104? Say that again. I mean, just.
When the individual departments submitted their capital request, and a lot of them submitted multiples, and then they would prioritize the ones that were most important to least important. There were a total of 104 individual requests from multiple
Okay.
departments on things that they were asking for capital funding.
Multiple.
It was from across all departments.
Okay, that's where I'm.
Yes.
Okay, I got it now.
Of those, we only put money into 10 of them, and I don't think we completely funded any of them. We put as much as we could.
I got you.
Patrick and Stephanie had a question about this
Yes,
slide.
thank you for this. The managers recommend additional operators out of the 34 million. We're only going to, right now, only fund 3 million. That's correct, of the 34. So is there, like for me, my train of thought would be fixing those life cycles or like facilities is more important because like it will save us money by going renewable, by fixing those holes to save energy and stuff like that. What criteria was used to determine the 3 million? Like, because you have mentioned the hoses, and I think the hoses are important. You want to put out fires, right? Mm-hmm. But
Well, in the hoses, for example, that was a capital
Okay.
project that was listed but not funded. Of the managers, I've done a little bit, very little on, well, that would have been new initiatives. IT equipment replacement, for example, buying computers over, things like some additional funding for positions that may have been part-time initially. I mean, we're coming out of the ARPA funding for positions that each year are having to accommodate, additional funding for those. Those were the types of things.
Okay.
I think of that entire amount, there were only 3 full-time positions recommended of 50-something that were asked for in terms, and that, I'm bouncing back between new initiatives and additional funds. A huge ask in those additional operating funds, and one that we did not recommend anything, and I'll get to that on Big Rocks, was overtime. And we're anticipating another big hit in overtime again, but just didn't feel like the money was in there.
And since you're about to turn to the next page, you can save this, but just make, can we get a base of the current recommended big rocks to fund? So like, the next slide, it says public safety, for example, pay table adjustment of 3%. So, they're asking for an additional 1.7. What is a base now? Can we get that information?
I'm sure we can get it to you.
Like current versus projected for FY26?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's probably a good, well, Commissioner Johnson had a question too.
Yeah,
before.
and Commissioner Link did as well.
Okay.
Out of the 104 different capital requests that weren't recommended for funding, were they existing capital projects? You know how you have the life cycle capital program, or were they new capital requests?
A lot of them were existing,
Okay.
ongoing.
So just like skip a year of funding into that? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm curious, how much of that 35 million that was requested would likely in prior years have been funded or partially funded by federal grants that are pretty regular? Was there an anticipation that we'll be losing those grants due to current chaos and?
I don't,
Oh, that was our general budget, wasn't it? Oh,
yeah,
that-
this was just, yeah, this
These are just general requests that
It
aren't
was just general
typically.
fund over limits. You know, a lot of the over limit stuff that was asked for, power, water, increases and those things. You'll see a lot of in the detail, things like increases in streetlights, and the power with streetlights, and additional, issues with, as we grow our greenway and our park system, and we've got, the trails and the greenways, and as these things come online, they all require additional resources in the departments that are coming in as over limit requests to keep up with expansion. And there's just only so much of that to go around.
So has there been any figuring in this initial round of loss of those federal revenues?
I don't think there was with this at this point yet, because I don't think we know exactly.
So we could see a further deficit if anticipated federal revenues don't come through.
Possibly. Yeah, let me jump up to this real quick, because this is, I almost moved this one up in the presentation. We have added one line in here that was not in the presentation sent to you, and that is the increase in pension fund contributions that we just had not included. So we start off with this budget, and we're looking at it and say, okay, we're $9 million to the good in revenue. Well, right off the top, and this is what I think was always intended as terms of big rocks, there's $6 million of that 9 that are, with the exception of the issues related to pay, step plan, table adjustments, market increases, these are things that we just can't choose whether we're going to fund or not. Insurance increases, vehicle liability insurance, the pension increases, and we're still working with credits in that area with the increased pension fund contributions and probably have a couple more years of those credits. But that 375 is in addition to the credit. Once we lose the credit, I mean, that's $1 million a year instead of, or more. You know, the pay table adjustments, jail medical contract continues to go up, and that's something that's got to be paid. Street light utility cost goes up. Narcan and AED was a state mandate that we've got to include. Cyber insurance is really a mandatory additional expense. So you start adding all those things together, and all of a sudden, we've got $3 million instead of the $9 million. Other things that, you know, that are in, I don't know that I would go quite as far, in part because we didn't fund them. I'd mentioned that we didn't fund any of the additional overtime that was requested by the departments above and beyond what they were given last year, and then most of them, as I understand, got increases last year. You will be getting recommendations brought to you probably at your first budget meeting once the mayor's prepared his budget. There were recommendations from both of our boards, pension and defined benefit, to make changes to their plans. And those, the numbers aren't in here yet because you haven't made a decision whether or not you're interested in even pursuing it this year. And I think that the timing of that would be with you, with that first budget meeting. If there is a desire to do that, there will be numbers associated with it. And that's money, that's additional funding that is, for the pension, is fairly significant if you were to do it. But before we plug that in, it's ultimately your decision as to whether or not there's interest to do that this year or not. But both groups felt compelled to bring something forward there. Another one that I know is, this one was new to me, so I don't have a lot of the background, but there was the policy put in place a couple or 3 years ago with the Community Energy Fund. Those dollars coming in would go into that fund and instead of going to the general fund. And that's being projected this year as about $2.5 million that will move over into that fund for that program. That's $2.5 million or some amount of money less that could go into the general fund that's going over. I'm not saying anything other than that's just something I believe that you could, as a commission, you know, set a limit on that, not to take money out of that fund or to stop money going into it, but you could put a cap on it as some of those continue to grow, and anything above a certain amount doesn't go in but stays in the general fund. So just a few.
Can you remind us what was the community energy fund?
This was.
I mean, what was it?
So when utility revenues increase for the unified government, that we would steer kind of new revenue above a certain point to that community energy fund that would do things like better insulate older homes, for example.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can you walk that program back a little bit, explain it
Let me see,
differently?
I've got some notes on that. Would have been in future
And we have a work
consideration.
session presentation from 2-ish years ago, so we can get that for you too. That would kind of outline it well.
Yeah, it was in March of 2020, Mayor and Commission adopted a community energy fund policy. And the difference between actual and policy limits each fiscal year goes to the CEF project. Those numbers continue to grow, and so that's just additional money.
So you said earlier it goes into it went into a fund, what you're talking about. Is it somewhere on this page that you're speaking from?
No, it was just, this actually is something later that.
Oh, okay.
That is one of the future considerations, because we feel like that fund's going to continue to grow. Not that you wouldn't want to keep, I think it was a good policy, and not that you would want to keep putting money into it. But, you know, if all of a sudden if it becomes more money that's going into that fund each year, then this group feels like they could fund with projects for that year, you may want to consider that money, or setting back a certain amount of that money towards the general fund to pay for other programs. Just, okay, so, let's see.
Everything over that goes into the tabs.
Patrick?
That was
Real quick, back to the overtime. So I think we discussed this last year, but it was like earlier this year, we had all total department was spending about $8 million in overtime. Part of that overtime was lack of staffing. Has that issue been addressed, or is it getting better?
The staffing is getting better. We've had conversations with some of the departments, tried to have, I know with the fire department, they're very aware of it and looking. And a lot of the fire department overtime was being driven by the need for drivers to keep engines in operation. And they're working very hard to bring new recruits through the program to be able to fill those positions. The police department is a much better spot than they are now. We've still got vacancies in the sheriff's department. Those are probably the three biggest dollar value users of the overtime. But
So does budget department, do y'all feel that number, if it stays consistent and we keep hiring, that the 8 million will go down in overtime? Or is it just, we need to hire more people or something, or everybody's getting taxed?
well, I think certainly that, continuing to fill positions will address overtime.
Okay.
And I was going to wait for, to ask this question, but since we're talking about like the fire department, one of the selling points of the unionizing of the fire department was having the capability of reaching out to the big whoever to help us with grants and supplies and training. Have we utilized any of those, or has the fire department utilized any of those selling points to support the reason we voted, one of the reasons we voted for the unionizing of the fire department?
I don't remember.
Can you say that again? One of the selling points for the union was that they would help.
But IAFF may be able to bring in some funds through grant activity and similar
That's not
procurement.
current at this point. We are currently in collective bargaining agreement negotiations. We'll resume April 14th and 15th. Grants
Is it part of the discussion, though, for the collective bargaining? Because that was one of the reasons we supported the unionizing. So that, hopefully, that is going to come up in your collective bargaining. I would like to think about.
I will be happy to bring it up.
Okay.
And see what we.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we get into something that I've learned a lot about in the last 2 months. Fund balance and the importance of fund balance and the need to reserve fund balance. And so here's a graph of a trend of where we are. And I've also learned that fund balance has a whole lot of components. It's not just how much you take out, but how good years were. The magic number here that we have set is that we want to always be above at a minimum of a 2-month reserve, which is that 16.7%. It should really be, much higher than that, in my opinion. You can see these numbers whittling down. FY23, we were up into the 30%. And then over the last couple of years, it has come down. A lot of this due to fairly significant infusions into the capital program for life cycle replacement. There were significant amounts of fund balance there. And then there were some other big dollar items. I believe College Avenue may have been one of those that when that property was bought that took some of that, as well as a couple of other things. But so we are down FY25, we're at 20.4%. The $3 million that has been introduced into the budget that I will transfer to the mayor to balance it would get us to 18.9%. So we're still above that 16.7, but we're only about 2% above that number. And so, I guess the big picture that I get from it, from looking at this and going back, is that, one, if we're using any fund balance, that I would look at that as deficit budgeting, and it's really not a good practice in my mind to have to take any money out of that to pay for what you're asking to do this year. Blending that with such a small ask and knowing for example, of the 110 capital projects, and so many of those being annual operating, Commissioner Johnson pointed out. Fact that we didn't recommend funding, and if we're not able to recommend funding as a group, that doesn't mean they're going away.
Right.
You know, they're all going to come back next year. Those are all ongoing issues that we've got to deal with, as well as, and I've added this slide, things that as we move forward into the next 2 or 3 years these are big issues that, that we've got to think about, and what makes fund balance, among other things, so important. All of the wonderful projects that are coming out of SPLOST and T-SPLOST, and I'm not singling out the East Side Library because I think it's a great project, but it's just an example. When that library comes online, that's another $1 million a year to operate that facility. That will be coming out of general fund dollars to do that. The energy franchise tax revenue, that was what we talked about earlier. We're estimating for 26 over $2.5 million to go into that. And if that continues to grow, that may be a decision that this body wants to make in terms of putting a cap on that.
I can't remember all the details of that. I know that the mayor just mentioned work using that fund for home repair, maintenance with energy and such. But, and I know Andrew was integral in putting this together, was there, could that money also be used for life cycle maintenance, for ACC life cycle maintenance, for a heat pump water heater, for insulation, for windows, for the, for anything that has, the way that we're using the SPLOST Renewable Energy Fund? Or was that specifically for community? Do you remember that? Or could that be used on the, East Side the library, the East Side Library for the electricity as we're building that?
So it's a locally adopted policy, which means it can be used in whatever manners this body decides it can be used. As it's written right now, it has 2 focus areas. One is on supporting businesses in town with energy conservation and renewable energy use. And the second is addressing low-income residents with their energy use. Implementation has been, is legally complex, and so you all adopted an implementation plan that is narrowly tailored in order to start out in a fairly conservative manner. And so the 2 commitments that have been made, to your point, about $1.2 million for renewable energy infrastructure as part of the mental health facility. Again, kind of hitting on that low-income component, but
Is that part of that 2.5?
no.
Okay.
So my understanding is the 2.5 is the projected increment growth for FY26.
I mean, those funds are just general funds. They're coming from the franchise fees that y'all have specifically targeted for a specific purpose. I will tell you, there's some legal issues related to doing some of those improvements on private property, and that's why we're trying to be conservative.
But they
in how we
could be
approach it.
used, I mean, in terms of legal, it also could be used like for the East Side Library.
It could be used to pay
There's a lot of- right.
salaries.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
general funds.
Right, well, I know, but it was,
I'm just
specified for
yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Well, all right, we learned so much stuff, and I guess I just can't remember everything. Have we ever received a report on using any of those funds in the past? Was it buried somewhere? Especially when you're talking about helping low-income families
Right.
with stuff.
Not at this point because it's still in its infancy. So there's been 2 years that funding's been available, and this body has designated that funding from each of those 2 years. The first year, that funding went to the energy improvements at mental health. The second year, it was used as a match on a grant that was solicited from the Sustainability Department. That grant was actually awarded, but is now stuck in federal limbo and is tenuous at best. And so, no, there has not been a report, because right now it'd be fairly brief.
Thank you.
Okay. Few of the other things, the hotel motels tax set aside for the arena bonds, So 150,000 reduction expected transfer to general fund. These are anticipated things out in the future that they're out there and we can't just pretend that they're not in terms of need for future funding. Fleet replacement is always a big one. I'll throw this one in again. All of those capital things that are not currently being funded or that are being underfunded they're not going away. They will live here until there's a decision made on what to do with them. We think ultimately to the overall general fund as the TADs begin to grow and become successful, that increased increment stays in those specific areas and would not go back to the general fund. That's a planning tool just to keep, that we need to keep in our mind as we move forward. And then the 3 pay plans that are out there that really they're not going to affect us in this year's budget, but pay plans, we've got the sheriff's, the unified, and the fire compensation study. Those things are going to come online, and those are going to be more than likely big number issues those will be big rocks next year. I'm fairly confident, in moving forward.
When you say next year, do you mean FY26?
No, FY27, I would think. I think the timing on those plans being completed goes into
Next calendar year.
Next calendar year. So I'm looking at those as being next year, but certainly big things that are underway that there will be an expectation to do something with them upon their completion. So those are future big rocks. SPLOST ones to me is one that was really eye-opening. I'd always heard about it being in planning, but never seen it from this position. Everything that we bring online that's new and wonderful, and new fire stations and trails and parks, and every one of those things the next year has an additional operating cost that goes into it, or maintenance, or security, and we've got to continue to be planning for that in terms of how our dollars are spent. So
Speaking of, back on that earlier slide, because, and those operating expenses are listed with each T-SPLOST and SPLOST project, so they're not that they're not accounted for in the planning.
Right.
That's just
getting them into the
budget is thing.
budget.
But back there in that, I don't know which slide that was, slide 2 or 3, the one where it said T-SPLOST, SPLOST, operating impact, offset funds requested, and then the recommended offset was 0. Do you know what that 312 was for? Speaking of projects that we put in, it's there, that 312.
There were multiple projects. I know one of them that I believe was in there was trail security and cameras and things. Dudley Park Greenwood? And Firefly. In terms of increased presence on the trail, there was a desire ultimately long-term to look at doing a camera-type system, all just regular maintenance, general maintenance.
Right. But
all
I
this
was
stuff.
wondering if there was some other thing, it could have been a road here, it could have been this, could have been, something else.
We got roads too.
Yeah.
and
No, but on
corridors
this,
that are being looked at that are
yeah.
going to do the same thing,
Right.
so that's kind of was my intention of what to bring to you all. I hope it was helpful as we get started with this. We're going to hand off the work that is done by the team sitting behind me with me tomorrow, and we'll start that with the mayor, and then you should get this at the end of the month, end of April.
And when's the compensation and benefits work session, Brad?
April.
April.
Yes, you will
Second
get more
Tuesday of April.
specifics at your April work session on comp and benefits.
Will we also get an update on insurance, Blue Cross Blue Shield?
That's part of it, yes.
Thank you.
And, I guess because more people are watching us now, and someone called me before, and I guess I didn't have an answer for, for the, looks like 42 million unassigned from 2014 budget does that sound familiar? It's on page, it's on page 20 of our annual budget from 2024. So I guess the best way to put it, if there were funds, because most of the stuff that you've shown us is in percentages, so But dollar-wise, if there was there a dollar amount of unassigned funds from 2014, dollar-wise?
From 2024?
2024, I'm sorry.
In terms of fund balance?
Yes.
Yes.
And my question is, that amount, whatever it is, what did we do with that?
I mean, the fund balance that we're working with right now is, the easiest way I could say is the amount that we have allocated into the budget we're presenting to the mayor tomorrow is almost half of what was there, projected to be. So, I mean, there's not much else. There's certainly not, the number in terms of unassigned that we were working with moving forward, to my knowledge, is just not there. If you send me something with that specific number from your constituent, I can try to get you a better
Well,
answer.
they're tapping you. Is that-
No, I was just gonna say, we can look into that. I've recorded that page number, and we
Okay.
can get back to you with more
Okay.
detail.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
That's appropriate.
Anyone else? Carol?
Yeah, how are we're in here is any mention of life cycle maintenance. I mean, I pulled up the big rocks from last year, and this, like, usually that's a big thing in there, the life cycle maintenance. Are we addressing this in the budget that you're passing off
It
to the
was
major? to
Life
the mayor?
cycle maintenance for our facilities was one of the 10 projects funded, but it was funded at it was certainly not at 100% of the ask from our central services.
So that's in.
Of the
that-
roughly 7 million in capital funds that was allocated, life cycle for facilities was one of them.
Okay, and that would be the operating, which,
No, that's the
which,
capital.
Is that capital?
which slide is that?
It was right there, 10 of the 104 for a total of 6.9 million. One of those 10 projects was facility life cycle, but it was funded at a relatively small percentage of what the ask was for this year.
Because can we see something with that, like that chart thing, like where we should be, where we should be if we're going to go along with this plan, how this is going to put us behind in terms of that? They're shaking.
And then with that sort of a vehicle fleet graphic like that, too.
Yeah, we have a fleet. Can we have that on the fleet and also just on the life cycle maintenance, if we have that information? If we're cutting back from what we kind of said our plan was, just so we know that.
I have a question. So also the capital improvement plan covers a variety of things. And you mentioned that a portion of the ask was funded. And so were you thinking about a specific item, a piece of equipment, or infrastructure, something specific to come up with a dollar amount to approve for each of the ones that you did approve, or recommending for approval?
Not as much a specific dollar amount as I had a specific total dollar amount in mind that I had a comfort level of, because anything above a very small number was pulling from fund balance. And I really didn't want, that's deficit spending in my mind to pull from that. So I had a small bucket of money, and I had 104 projects to look at. The ones that I tended to focus on in terms of final decisions were those capital projects that, to me, felt those basic services that as a government we need, we need, the facility life cycle. We need to take care of our parks. We need to take care of our roads.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking about.
And if I would have funded all of those, I would have been way over just those. So it was just try to do a percentage of each one, in part somewhat based on what it looked like they may have spent in the last year or two, and may be asking for more this year to catch up, but they spent this much, so if we can give them that much again, that's better than giving them nothing, and we can spread it over 8 or 10 instead of 1 or 2.
Sure. Do you know if the apportioned amount for, like, said department would be enough to make a difference for what they need? Let's use an example like the courthouse life cycle, replacing the elevator. And I'm going to throw out a fake number. Let's say the amount that was approved was $300,000, because you wanted to approve something, life cycle maintenance. But we found, and we know that it's more expensive for the elevators. So I guess this, what I'm trying to get to, is what you approved for those individual departments enough to actually accomplish the goals that they need to?
I think the best answer I can give you there is I certainly hope so, and that was my intention, because they were more general, big numbers,
Okay. I
I
guess they let you know if not.
Services, bridges and boardwalks, and a big number. It's not the bridge and boardwalk at this park needs
Sure.
it. And so that's across the board, and, you start looking at even the number of boardwalks and bridges that we have within our parks, within this community is astounding. I had no idea there were that many to take care of. But so, they give me a number, I make my best decision, and we try to do as much as we can with what we got without, if I could have done it with no fund balance, I would have loved to, but it would have been virtually nothing at
Thank
that
you.
point.
Most of your presentation looked like recommended expenditures that we can look forward to that is impacting us. Mike is not here, but we were talking about there may be over $1 million of tickets that have not gone through the courts for some reason. Are we also looking at where departments or stuff like the Judicial Center has money out there that we just have not? I wish Mike was here, but is there a way to capture monies that could be out there that could be substantial?
We did not, and in the past, I don't know, this year with the circumstances we were in, we did not go back. I mean, I've had that conversation. I think what you're getting to would be more of going back in and doing an in-depth analysis of the base budget and what they're ending up with at the end of the year, or revenues or something. So it's a significant amount of work to do that. Short answer, we did not do that this year in terms of trying to establish these numbers.
Well, I guess I'm suggesting that we need to look at that as revenue, because if $1 million is out there floating around, we need to capture it. I guess that was and like I said, Mike could probably address it better than I could, but he was going to send me some stuff, but he didn't.
I can tell you that when we were looking at requests from individual departments for over limits, and in cases where our budget experts back there were aware of trends within that department where they may end up on a fairly regular basis with additional income at the end of the year in other areas, I mean, I had to factor that in terms of whether or not I was going to, because we had a little bitty bucket and a whole lot of asks. If we had departments that were regularly coming at the end of the year and asking for contingency funding just to get to the end of the year versus ones that oftentimes carry, a surplus through the end of the year, that I took that into account on where I tried to do the additional funding.
And I want to change to the T, when you have T/SPLOS, is that T/SPLOS plus SPLOS?
Yes.
Okay. So my question is, no, it's not my question, it's a statement. I find it really difficult that staff also submits proposals for projects, and then we're asking the community to submit proposals and projects. I think it would be a better use of our time if staff would work on the front end with community folk and submit proposals that the community wants. I looked at the list, and it's almost like the community, even though T/SPLOS and SPLOS is a supplement, an additional tax, but it looks like staff and the community are competing for limited dollars. It should be one or the other. If the staff wants to do this, I don't think it is right to encourage community to submit proposals that they're competing with.
And of course,
staff.
Commissioner, as a process question.
Yeah,
you know,
thank you.
This is sort of after a referendum has passed already, and of course, you know, when that referendum passes, we know that, you know, this new park over here is going to mean one new staff person. But kind of to your question, we of course are going to have a couple of checkpoints later this year on the coming T-SPLOS program that'll be in front of the voters.
And I guess that's
March
my
of
point.
2026. And remind me, do we have a time, y'all, already when we're ready to whittle down? Do we know what that is? We can get that for you.
Yeah, I guess that's my point, and I am intentional. Maybe I was a little wordy, but I was very intentional what I was trying to say, because these are the concerns that I'm hearing. So I want folk to know it's a legitimate concern and it needs to be addressed.
Well, and one thing I think I will say, it may not be popular, but I'm not going to be here much longer. So, you know, I think when you start seeing these bigger issues and we start talking about SPLOS dollars and what they can be used for, and we're looking at 100 projects that were capital expenses that are part of operating this government that we can't fund, I think that is a very, very legitimate use of SPLOS dollars to pay for those things versus, you know, getting to a point ultimately where we're talking about a millage rate increase that nobody wants. None of us want that. But, you know, so much of this is regular ongoing operating of our departments to continue to maintain facilities, and I think a lot of that is legitimate use of SPLOS dollars as an alternative to increasing taxes that we should consider.
Dexter?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. One other thing we always talk about is our interest. You know, what monies that we gain on our interest, are we factoring in as interest and trouble into the general fund at all, Brad? And then my second is, I know we'll talk about it eventually, is our enterprise funds. For how much monies that we have in those particular funds and how we use those funds for some of the capital stuff that we're doing. So I think, you know, we got a general fund, then we have our enterprise fund, and, you know, are we using those funds, like I said, to either fund some stuff that needs to be done, and how we balance that out between our general fund and what's going on in the enterprise funds.
And this is general fund. I mean, the enterprise funds are a little different in terms of, you've got to be very careful about, you know, if you've got an enterprise fund that is doing well, you can't pull generally from that enterprise fund to offset something in another area that money was never intended to be used for.
Understand.
We try to do it where we can. One of the projects that I've recommended to the mayor to be funded is very closely related to our building inspection department. We've got money in that fund to pay for a position. And so we were able to get a position in a vehicle to provide a service that's related to development through that fund, even though it'll be housed in another department. When we can do that, we certainly look to do that. But, you know, a department sitting there with a big balance, we can't take that money and put it over here where we need it.
Yeah, and I fully, believe me, I understand that. But I guess what I'm saying is, though, you know, we talk about some capital projects or some deferred maintenance type stuff. Could those enterprise funds be used for some of that? I guess that's where I'm going to get. I know we don't need to commingle.
Right.
I never want to do that, but could some of those enterprise funds, though, for some of our deferred maintenance type stuff?
Good example, Commissioner, that's proximate to where we're sitting right now. So the purchase of the Public Utilities Water Business Office building, which of course used to be branch of Athens First, now Synovus, that was purchased with those enterprise fund dollars. And so similarly, capital upgrades there can draw from that enterprise fund. So if they needed a new roof rather than general fund, those dollars could go there.
Okay.
Commissioner Link?
While we're talking about revenue sources or potential revenue sources, I just want to again bring up a fire safety fee that could draw some funds from large non-tax-paying entities. It's common in other communities, especially university communities. So we're looking at a tight budget. we need to start looking at additional revenues, especially when we do have a fire services that has required some big capital expenses in recent years, particularly because of some of the building and construction that's kind of related to the university, large-scale, high-rise apartments and things like that. I really think we need to get serious about opening up that conversation, and maybe the union could help us with that.
Commissioner Johnson?
Hi, what's our appetite for selling some of the land that's unused, sitting parcels? I requested a list, and I appreciate receiving it, but it's a very long list of properties that we don't do anything with. What's our appetite for selling that to individuals to generate tax revenue?
I mean, I think ultimately that would be the decision of this body to do it. You know, from an assessment standpoint, I can tell you that at least it's been my experience in the past that a long list of those properties that we own, there's a reason we own them. Because they're remnants, they're wet, they're in places that are not super suitable, you know, or not going to be of high dollar value to a developer. Now, I'm not saying all of them are. We've got properties out there that are very well suited, but we didn't get into that as part of this budget process.
Oh, sure. No, I think, I hear this a lot. It's up to you all to make the decision. You're the final voters. But if we don't know what's out there, I had to request the list. I didn't know there were so many properties. I do accept your answer. I understand some properties you can't sell them, you can't do anything with it. But there's critical information that would be helpful to know so that we can make better informed decisions. That's just a comment, but thank you.
Would it help to
Appreciate
see a column on that spreadsheet that might indicate, you know, purchased with state green space dollars or because of floodplain kind of questions, just so that there's something
Some
that's.
of them we couldn't sell
Right.
based on the way we bought them.
Yeah. And the list that I have, it does say like this is a flood zone. The one that former manager Williams gave.
Williams, okay.
And it says, you know, flood zone, blah, blah, blah. But my question is, and I'm going to probably to deflect to Commissioner Fisher. No, let me ask my question first, and then what, if any, is there? I asked this last year, and it didn't come out. It was not separated in our budget last year. What is the dollar amount of ARPA interest? If you don't know today, could you let us know?
I can find out, I'm sure, but I don't know today.
I asked over and over, and we danced around it, but I would like to know what the interest is with the ARPA dollars. Now I'm going to deflect to Commissioner Fisher, because I think now we're not, I know we're not going to make no huge changes between your budget and the mayor's recommendations and to the commission. We know we very limited. I think that what we're trying to do now is open the discussion how we move forward with more revenues than expenditures. And Commissioner Fisher, do you remember the conversation that you and I had about fees for fees for student housing as a possible revenue?
Right, yeah. And I think what we was looking at was trying to figure out as they build more student-based apartments, tack on a fee. I don't want to call it tack on a fee in order to do those type of, I call special projects to do more student housing in our community. And I'm not sure what that would consist of from a legislative perspective, what we would need to do as a body. But we're talking about fees and trying to collect revenues as developers come in and look at these projects. Should there be a fee for them to do if they're going to do housing? And again, that may be a legal question for our attorney. That may be something that we just can't look at them. But any type of project that we are doing that's going to be a huge project, are there any type of fees that might be attached to do that also?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind from, I would absolutely agree that I would want to dig very deep into it from a legal perspective, but I'm not sure that you could get into imposing fees on student multifamily, because then you're singling out a
Right.
different type, but you're basing it on who lives there.
Right.
I think if we were going to do something like that with fees, then it would be
Across the
fees for
board.
multifamily, and even then, I would think you'd want to do a very deep dive into it to make sure it was something, maybe getting into some type of an impact fee or something, but
Yeah, I like, that's what we, and that's what
That
word we
was the word
use,
you used.
impact, I'm sorry, thank you. And that's what we use.
That was
Brad.
the word you used.
Yeah, impact fees, yeah.
And Judd probably could get us a memo on this, but impact fees have to have a very specific expenditure plan associated with them. So for example, a lot of communities, if they're fast-growing, they may realize, hey, we're getting all this new residential stock, we need libraries and park space.
Yeah.
So for example, that's,
Offer sewer, capacity, possible.
yeah.
So,
Commissioner Taylor?
Are we gonna add something to the, affordable housing fund, or are we just too tight? It's too early?
we did not recommend anything. I think that was something that you all did last year that,
We have 5 million sitting there.
Was it $5 million?
That's right.
Was reallocated to the
So,
special, newly formed special revenue fund for housing and community development. $5 million.
Did we vote on it?
Last year.
Yeah, that's part of the budget.
Still sitting there
that's the
from
strike
last year.
fund, strike fund.
The strike fund, yeah.
To Commissioner Johnson's question about the surplus properties, the Government Operations Committee had a presentation on that was it just last month, this past
Monday.
meeting? You might want to take a look at the tape for that.
Thank you.
They went through line by line what properties might be built. We were looking at it from a land bank authority affordable housing perspective. But it turns out there are very few buildable properties out there that are owned by Athens-Clarke County.
Anything else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, on that, actually, this one, I'd like to get some historical data on this. This is what's being, like, what did we do last year, just to get me, like, in terms of the percentage recommended here? Is this, what did we do in the 25, 24, 23, a couple of years back? How much? So just in terms of explaining that as well to the public, that, that we are tightening things up or not tightening things up, or this is exactly the same that we've been doing. So that 9 and 10%, is that what we've been doing for the last couple of years? That's what I'd like to, is that on a page in the budget?
Like a multi-year snapshot?
Yeah, multi-year snapshot.
Do you want it for the manager recommended or for the commissioner?
The actual budget as
For the
approved?
percentage?
Well, is it that different?
yes.
Want both? You want both?
Both, sure, both.
Okay, we'll do.
Patrick?
What's the next step after Big Rocks? Do we?
Next step is that I will, along with our budget team and, and of course, Sarah and Andrew, we will meet with the mayor in the morning and kind of do more of a detailed handoff of the work that we did over the last 3 months to him, and then he will spend the month of April working on his budget proposal to be handed off to you at the end of the month. And then the month of May is the budget meetings, and those are the ones that Commissioner Fisher will preside over, and with the goal of adopting a budget no later than your June voting meeting, so you can go on vacation.
Yeah. I do
So our
have,
next big step will be wait for the mayor's budget.
yeah.
At the end of April, yes.
And then, of course, you'll get that pay and compensation work session the second Tuesday of April, so that's a little bit of an interim step.
Man, I do have one other question. Ray, I don't know, and I brought this up maybe a couple of years ago. That might help us, do we try to look at salary savings within positions that we don't feel? I know, I think Commissioner Culpepper might have brought it up, or either Commissioner Hamlin. If a position been sitting 10 or a year, we still haven't filled it. Is there any way that we can maybe sometime use those positions that if it hadn't been filled, we can wrap that back in to look at maybe salary savings from that perspective back into our general budget. That's something that we have had a conversation about, or thought about.
I mean, I think the very general answer, and my budget coworkers behind me may shoot me, but, I mean, I think that, you know, the vacancies over the course of a year, positions that remain unfilled, the way we've got that set up, those things, along with other operating expenses that were not expended in a fiscal year, that's what creates your salary savings to, you know, to continue to make sure you've got that 2-month window and then some for a rainy day.
Okay. Okay.
So, I mean, it's certainly all utilized, it's just the matter of the way you look at it. Now, there have been, you know, considerations given, and it used to be very real with me in my former position, that if you had a position and you didn't fund it for several years, or for a year or two, you better have a good reason why, because that position could go away.
Okay.
We didn't get into that with this budget, but.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, everyone, thank you very much. Look forward to the next go-round. Brad, team, thank you a bunch.
Thank you, guys.
This seems a lot less stressful.